Okay, this is the second time I'm doing this review because the other one, it did have sound, but it was really, really quiet. So I figured I should just do this over again because it's easier to edit. Alright, so the book I'm reviewing today is For a Song and 100 Songs, A Poet's Journey Through a Chinese Prison by Yiwu and translated by Huan Gongkong. This book was published in June of 2013 by New Harvest. It has 432 pages and it has 65 ratings on Goodreads. As you can probably tell, this book is nonfiction. I have reviewed a book by this author before, and I was really looking forward to reviewing some of his work in which he had written, because the other book that I had read of his, which was A Corpse Walker, and it was just a bunch of stories about people from the bottom rung of society. This book explains the intro that I read and that first book of his a little bit more, if anyone remembers. So when Tiananmen Square happened, Liao was a poet at that time. He was kind of the really artsy hipster part of the creative community. And I mean, just like any, first world creative community, there's like a kind of a rebellious aspect to it. And so when students protest at Tiananmen Square and the massacre was a result of that, Liao decided to write a poem called Massacre. In a way, was kind of a protest poem. And due to that poem, the government arrested him for being a counter-revolutionary, and he was arrested for quite a few months, and then he was detained waiting for trial, and then when he officially was convicted, he was in prison for a few years. And so this book is chronicling his time in the prison. And so one thing I thought was very interesting about this is, people who are essentially political prisoners, when we hear stories of them, they seem stoic and ideal type of person. But the way that Liao portrayed himself, I think he portrayed himself very humbly and very honestly. I mean, there are honestly times in his time that he was detained where he was trying to do a hunger strike, and just like a few days into it, he just crumbled. Or there were times where he was clearly faced with a choice of whether playing nice with figures that he would totally disagree with, or have to deal with horrible treatment by these higher-ups. He would definitely, bow down to them. I mean, sometimes literally. I think he portrays himself very honestly. He's not an ideal type of person at all. Throughout this book, you kind of realize that when he wrote the poem, he wasn't even really expecting to go to jail. If he had known that writing this poem would lead him to going to jail, you kind of wonder if he would have written it anyway. So you can't really place him into that type of selfless martyr type of figure that a lot of people would like to place on the heads of political prisoners. He is a very, very real person with flaws. While he is in prison, you kind of see how the Chinese prison system is set up. This book portrays different dynamics in prison. Like, people who are waiting for trials in jail are actually sometimes put in the same cell as people who are on death row. And they would call them the Walking Dead. And you see how other prisoners have to do death watch for them. And essentially how the Chinese prisons are run is that their prisons are essentially run by the prisoners, and the guards are just kind of the moderators in a sense. I mean, the guards, of course, run everything. They provide the food, they provide access to their letters, they provide, sometimes perks, or they're responsible for the prisoners, but the guards feel it's less work if they just let the prisoners have their own type of hierarchy. They have to give out food, they'll just give it to the higher up person and let the higher up person in that cell control everything in that cell, and they can be, they can decide their laws. One disturbing thing is, in a way to describe punishment, they would give them a menu with food items, but each food item is code for a particular type of punishment. If you don't do something right, then you get dumplings, and then dumplings can mean something horrible, like you have to kneel on rice for like 5 hours, or you have to punch yourself till you pass out. So some of the punishments are just really, really horrible. Also, it gets into the different crimes that the other people have, and even if someone's like a murderer, they're not seen as bad as someone who is seen as a counter-revolutionary. So still, like, these prisoners who are even about to be put to death by some of these policies, they are still trying to cling to the idea of communism and the party is good, and if they say this person's bad, then they must be subhuman. They're literally demonized for speaking out against the government in any way, shape, or form. So throughout this journey, Liao Yiwu's his views are confronted, or at least how extreme that he thought he was. I think at a certain point he realizes that he didn't do as much as he kind of feels like he was doing with his clique of really artsy guys doing poems and doing indie films, and sometimes just making up ruses just to meet girls. Like, his life before prison, it wasn't as purposeful as people would typically place on people who are about to give up part of their life for a cause. I mean, a lot of this stuff that happened to him was just really, really bad luck that he got caught for this, and he gave up quite a bit of his life to this one poem, or just doing this one indie film that he was about to do. They really didn't expect to be taken so seriously. And then also it kind of just briefly describes what happened to him after he got out of prison. This whole story of his time in prison, he wrote it 3 times. Like, he wrote the whole thing at least 3 times. I think the other 2 times the government found it and destroyed it, and the government was very adamant of not having it be released. The only way that this was published, of course, is he escaped to Belgium, and now he lives there. And I don't believe he's ever able to go back to China at this point. I think the Chinese government tried pretty hard to stop this book from being published, but obviously that didn't happen. So I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I really did appreciate this book for his honesty about himself. Like, he is not a perfect guy in any respect, and I think how he reacted to prison is not any different of someone else being dumped into prison in this type of prison and being put up against these type of pressures. Some of the things that happen in prison are just unsettling. Some of these things that these prisoners would do to each other. It's prison in a country that's not known for its human rights. So be warned about that. If you want to learn more about political prisoners, how it is to be deemed a counter-revolutionary in China, if you want to learn about prison in a communist country, then I would definitely suggest Were a Song and 100 Songs. So yeah, that is my review. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye!